This episode is brought to you by Sable International, building futures beyond borders.
Welcome back to the Relocated South African. Today's guest is maybe someone who doesn't fit the typical expat mold. Werner Trieloff is based in Porto Alegre in Brazil, but his work spans continents, connecting people, opportunities, and businesses across Latin America, Africa, Europe, and the US. Welcome, Werner.
Thank you, Jan. Always a pleasure to be with you and be part of the show.
Excellent. Lucky to have you. So, have to ask the first question. Where is Porto Alegre relative to, we all know Sao Paulo, but...
Yeah, or I would rather say the most famous one is Rio de Janeiro.
Of course,
but
Rio.
Yes, Sao Paulo as well. We're about an hour and a half, 2 hours flight down. It's the southernmost state of Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul, and the city called Porto Alegre. It's close to Argentina and Uruguay. So, very, very southernmost state.
Okay, excellent. So, Werner, where did you grow up in South Africa and study, and how did you get to live in Brazil? When I moved to Portugal, I had no idea how much paperwork was involved. Police clearances, apostille certificates, unabridged documents. It can feel overwhelming. Apostille takes care of it all for you. They apply, follow up, and courier everything directly to your door, whether you are still in South Africa or already settled abroad. Click the link in the description below and let Apostille take it from there.
I'm a Free State boy, actually. I was born and bred in Viljoenskroon, in Mililand, in South Africa, and stayed there until 21. Then I moved over to Scotland for a while, lived close to Loch Ness, up in Scotland. Was a great, great, great time. And then moved down to London for a stitch as well, I think about a year and a half or so. And then moved back to South Africa, studied at the Pucker, good old Potchefstroom Pucker. With my degree, postgrad and master's there in management accounting. And during my time in when I was living in London, I traveled across Europe and I met a Brazilian lady in Austria. And found out that actually she was living on the west side of London. I was living on the east side. We both were traveling across Europe, and we met up. And then I think 2 weeks after the trip ended, we met by chance again in a bar in London. Now, London, the size of that it is, by chance is really
It was destined.
It was destined. So that was 2004. And after a couple of years, going back and forth, she actually lived with me for a year in Potchefstroom as well. She ever so kindly said, now it's your turn, come to Brazil. So 2008, we sold everything in South Africa and then moved over to Brazil. Now, at that point in time, I think I could say, good morning, good afternoon, give me a beer, where's a bathroom, and give me a kiss. That was my Portuguese. The basics to survive. Now it's much better. Now I can actually speak Portuguese, Spanish, and I've got two kids, half Safa, half Brazilian. That's here as well.
Okay, awesome. We always get told that the Brazilian Portuguese is very different to what we speak and or what we hear. We have quite a lot of people that, especially in the building trade, that come here and are Brazilian. So, but all I can say is now falo Portuguese.
Yeah,
Because
I unfortunately didn't have that luxury. Either you had to learn it or you had to learn it. That's
yeah, no, I guess, and where we are in the Algarve, everybody speaks English. So
yeah. That's actually one problem that there is in Brazil and business in general is I think the population size that speaks English is a couple of percent. I think 3% or 4% or something like that. It's still a couple of million people if you look at the population of 220 million. But if you go across the country, depending on where you travel to, you struggle. And specifically if you come here for business, it is complicated.
So I have to ask, I was wondering where you said you're a whiskey connoisseur, and obviously living in Scotland, the UK, that's part of it. So what's the best whiskey you've tasted, and why is it special?
Oof, oof. That's a oof. That's a difficult question. It's the same as if someone asks you what country, is the best that you visited or lived in. Each one has got its own nuances and good
Maybe
points
I
in
should
that point.
make it
But
easy and say, is Scotch whiskey the best?
yes and no. There's a Japanese whiskey called Hibiki that is out of this world. Anybody that likes whiskey, I really recommend that. Um, and then on a Scotch whiskey itself, Talisker 18 years. That's a sweet spot. It's one of the best whiskey in the world for a couple of years. It's phenomenal. But the Japanese whiskies is something to explore for people that enjoy whiskey. It really is worthwhile.
Excellent. Now, I had to ask that. So, Werner, I mean, as a management accountant, you studied to be a management accountant. Uh, was the plan kind of to follow a traditional corporate type of office career, and how did that change to be where you are today?
So yes, I did a CA first, and then from there moved over to management accounting. And the idea initially when I moved through to Brazil was to work in the accounting field. I started working for a Brazilian audit firm. And at that point in time, since I couldn't speak Portuguese, they literally hired me, put me in a corner, and just said, "Find something to do." So it was me with a little dictionary, trying to speak to people and trying to find my way. I think out of the 150 people, two spoke reasonable English. So it was a bit of a challenge. But after 2-3 months of just finding my way around the place, they were part of an international association, and I went to the board and I told them, listen, I might not speak Portuguese, but I know accounting and I speak English. So why don't we create an international desk? Why don't we create a department that focuses on helping foreign companies come in? And we created the department. They sent me on a European tour a couple of months later, and I was able to get our first clients to come into Brazil. One of those I actually still work with today, so it's been over 20 years still that we work together. But through that, we started a whole new line where I started acting more, instead of doing the physical accounting, acting more as a liaison between the international associations and the Brazilian operation. And going forward, I then moved over to other company doing similar roles. But the more you travel and the more go between continents, the more people come to you with, can you help me with this? Or, oh, you're in Brazil. Do you know, can you get me coffee? Can you do this? Can you, I want to export so-and-so to Brazil. How can we do that? But being inside a company or a corporate structure, you have the service offerings that you have. So as an audit firm, you offer audit or tax or whichever. And that was in the back of my mind the whole time of, there's a lot of opportunities, but we can't take all of them. We need to leave them at the door. So in 2013, I said, let me give us a go. I opened up my own consulting firm where I was then able to still provide services for some accounting firms in Brazil, but then expand into other service offerings. So we started to doing agricultural exports from Brazil to Africa and the Middle East. We started doing some other consulting work, business trips, etc. From Africa to here or from Brazil to Africa. Then in 2017, we opened up Open Road Investments because then other opportunities started appearing as well. Open Road has got 3 verticals, startups. We actually did 2 exits now at the end of the year, and we closed that department. Renewable energy, buy side, sell side of renewable energy operations in Brazil and Latam, hydro, solar, wind farms, everything else, and M&A mid-market for the Brazilian market. And then 2018, with my connection with the international associations, one of the people that I met in 2009 in Barcelona created his own association in 2012, Abacus Worldwide, which is a global association of accountants, lawyers, and auditors. He reached out to me and he said, "Hey, are you in Brazil?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Don't you want to take on the role as LATAM director for the association?" I said, "Okay, sounds interesting." And in 2022, over the last couple of years, I think I've been to more than 16 African countries for business trips and business missions, etc. In one of these missions, I met one of the board members of Afro Chamber, which is a chamber of commerce that connects Brazil to Africa. And we got into discussions, and they said, "Yeah, since you already do a lot of business with Africa, don't you want to get involved with us as well?" So at this point in time, there's a number of different hats that are on there. The accounting, I've never actually done an accounting entry in my life, but it serves as a basis, for everything else that we do. So with the startups, to be able to understand how the business operates, how the finance works, everything else. On M&A, for example, being able to read financials, being able to speak to people from top level all the way down, etc. So it's given me a good grounding in business in such. But yeah, I realized at a very early stage in Brazil, it's much easier to contract people here to do the physical accounting itself rather than to do it. And I focus on the business aspect of it.
Okay. And which African country would be the biggest in terms of trade? Is it still South Africa,
Oh,
between Brazil and Africa, or?
yeah. Yes and no, because it depends on what area. So, I mean, when people ask me about Africa, I normally say the easiest route of entry is always South Africa, because of culture, structure, organization, tax-wise, everything else. But there are a couple of other countries now that Brazil has got very good ties with, and depending on the industry. So, for example, we Ethiopia, for example, with cattle, um, or Senegal and Ivory Coast with cacao. So it depends on the different country. But
Mm,
and Africa, the continent, the moment you start traveling it on a map, it looks small, but it is huge. It
it's
is
massive.
massive.
Yeah.
And it's very different you doing business with someone in Senegal, or for example, than doing business with someone in Tanzania. Um,
Oh,
Cultures
really?
are different. The region is different. So yeah, but Brazil is looking at the African content very sharply, from government level all the way to private sector. I mean, we're working now with companies in the energy sector, in the mining sector, or in agriculture, expanding from Brazil to Africa and it's different regions. So
Well,
there's a lot of opportunity.
excellent. And just just thinking about doing business in Brazil versus South Africa, is it very different, the environment?
Yeah, yes. Brazil. I've got this internal joke, and Brazilians, excuse me, and any South Africans that hear this as well. But people normally ask me, now, what is the cultural similarities between Africa in general, or South Africa and Brazil? And I say, politically we bugger, economically we're suffering, but the people are always happy, and that is very true for both countries. Now, if you look at a business perspective, Brazil has got one of the most complicated tax regimes in the world. Is really, I think Brazil and India, if I'm not mistaken. So it's complex, um, but you've got a massive market. So the moment you can get into Brazil and you can set up everything correctly, you've got more than 220 million people that you can access, and it's a strong economy. So, um, and then to jump from Brazil, for example, to Chile, Paraguay, Argentina, Colombia, it's reasonably easy.
Mm.
So it's a good door of entry into Latam and such. But it is complicated. Not a easy market.
Okay. And I mean, the one thought, for the podcast in terms of immigration, it's not a sort of obvious destination for immigration from South Africa, but yet it seems like it's a great place to live. Would you? Why would you say people don't immigrate there?
I think they do. For example, so we have a WhatsApp group in Brazil called South Africans in Brazil, where I think we have more than 55 members already. So there is a bunch of South Africans here, and I think it's people know about it. I mean, Brazil is famous globally for soccer, for meat, for samba, everything else. But more people are looking at it, and a lot of the people that I know that have come through here is normally been because they married either Brazilian woman or guy, and through that have moved over. But it's a nice country to live in if you speak the language.
Okay.
If you don't, and if you live in a region, Sao Paulo, Rio, wherever, where you've got a good foreign support, then it's okay. But if you don't, if you live maybe in the countryside or so, and you do not speak the language, it's complicated. My first year and a half here was an absolute nightmare. But once you get the linguistics and you understand the culture, amazing. They are similar to us in a sense that there's a saying in Portuguese: you lose a friend, but you never lose a joke. So if the opportunity is there, you have fun and you joke with it, even if you're going to get your friend a bit, a bit pissed off with you. But
Yeah.
it's a fun culture. It's nice people.
Okay. I was going to say, I mean, you've already answered the question that it took a while to adapt, and mostly because of the language. But just generally, what's life like there? Is it similar to South Africa?
It's very similar and depends on the region. So, for example, Brazil is a continental country. For us, for example, to fly up to Sao Paulo is about an hour 45. And then from Sao Paulo to Manaus, which is the capital of the Amazonas, is another 4 hours. And you're still in the same country. So it's huge. It is absolutely, and sometimes it's cheaper for me to fly to South Africa than it is to fly to Porto Alegre in the north of Brazil, for example. So it depends. I've had the pleasure and the honor to be. I've been to I think more than 20 states across Brazil, and it's very different. The northeast, the culture is very different to the southern regions, for example. Or Manaus is very different to some of the coastal regions. So it depends. The region that I live, they love their barbecues, the Braai, the churrascos. The people are very open and very warm in receiving you, which is again similar to South Africa as well, and very creative. They find ways of surviving and of making things work, which is for the companies that work in IT, for example, Brazil is phenomenal because the programmers think so outside of the box. It can get complicated for people that try and find ingenious solutions to not pay taxes and to do the wrong thing, but the creativity is there. So it's a nice country to live in, definitely.
Excellent. And I mean, obviously, you mentioned barbecue. The meat is phenomenal, but in general, just food-wise.
Food-wise, again, it differs from region to region. So we, for example, you've got black beans and rice, which is a staple food reasonably across Brazil. But then if you go to Rio de Janeiro up in the north, it's more of a brown bean or a white bean. In the northeast, a lot of spice. Not like us with a piri-piri that has a taste. It just burns. But it is much more spicy than what you would eat in the south, for example. So each region has got its own type of food. The food in Minas Gerais is phenomenal. It's very heavy, but it's amazing. And in regards to the meat that you mentioned, I had my sister and my brother-in-law came through to visit a couple of weeks ago. And in Brazil, normally, for example, in the southern region, when we do a braai, we just put salt. There's no pepper, there's no olive oil, there's no spices, there's no anything else. Because the reason is you want to taste the taste of the meat. Each cut has got its own taste. And that's always amazing, for example, when my sister was here, for them to experience it and go, it's the same animal, but just by having a different cut, it tastes completely different. And that's something that we
Wow.
don't in South Africa. We normally have, marinade, everything else, which is amazing. And a lot of the times when I do braais for Brazilians here, I mix in biltong spice and I do some crazy things. So the first reaction is, oh, bless me, you didn't use just salt. But when they experiment it and they try it, they actually quite like it. So, but it really is, um, it's very good, the food here.
It's interesting because we've got a South African steakhouse around the corner from us, and the guy imports all his meat from South America because he can't import from South Africa because of
With a foot and mouth.
and mouth disease. So, but the meat, I mean, the cuts and the prime,
Phenomenal.
the ribeyes,
Yeah.
it is really, really excellent. One of the things that people who immigrate always talk about is just physical safety. What's it like where you are?
Again, it depends. It's similar to South Africa, but I think depending on which city you stay in, it's more relaxed, and as well as which regions you go to. So, for example, my sister lives in Pretoria. Depending on where I am in Pretoria, I'll walk around during the day, go a couple of blocks to go to a shop or whatever. At night, I won't. I'll take a Uber and I'll go from one place, or take a car and go from one place to the next. Brazil is similar to that. So Porto Alegre, for example, where I live, there's certain areas where it's reasonably safe up until about 10, 11 o'clock at night. After that, I would recommend, take a Uber or take a car home. And Sao Paulo is a bit more complicated. Sao Paulo and Rio specifically. So there's certain cities that is much more, you need to be much more aware. But it's normally, South Africa, well, I lived in Pretoria many moons ago. In the space of, I think, 2 years, our company was on drop twice. Our house was on dropped 2, 3 times. So I had personal, experience with crime, etc. in South Africa. Whereas here, I think in 18 years here, I think there was one assault. That's it. So there is issues. You need to be aware, as in any other developing country as well. But normally it's more just to rob something from you, is not to kill you. So yeah, it's
And
they stop you,
and
put a gun, give me all your wallet, your things, you give, and they go.
and in terms of corruption and policing and that kind of thing, because that seems to be a big problem in South Africa right now. What is it like over there?
So corruption is something. Brazil had a couple of international scandals over the last couple of years. Unfortunately, on the political level, and on a high level, there's corruption is massive, which also increases the cost and the complexity of doing business in Brazil, because there's always someone who's looking to get a cut, some way, shape, or form. There is improvements. There has been massive improvements with this over the years, but it's still complicated for people to go or to come into the country to do business. And the policing, it's again also depends on the region. So you've got certain regions and certain cities where, I think it's Goiânia, for example, there's got a zero policy. You do anything there and you get caught, you're in very big trouble. And then there's other states where you get a slap on the hand and you walk away. So it depends again, because it's a big country. But you are, for example, you do see, if you call the police, they would normally show up reasonably quickly. So it's, and again, when you, for people that think, for example, to come live in Brazil, reach out to me at some point or whichever, but it's always good to get a better understanding of where you're going to live, what you're going to do. And each city has got its own neighborhoods, which is going to be more recommended or not, safety-wise, etc.
Okay. And Werner, stuff, these are questions that come up, from people thinking about immigration. What about healthcare and schooling?
So in Brazil is one of the few countries globally that's got a total public health system. It's called SUS, SUS, and it actually works. So, there's it's an integrated system, covers the whole country, quite nice. On the private health side, very good systems. So if you've got the finances to pay for that, the majority of people do pay, but very, very good. There's a lot of people that do medical tourism coming into Brazil. So depending on what they need to have done, they come in, fly in and do a fly out, specifically Americans. And schooling is very good. It's very, very good. Again, depending on which region you live in and what you do. So, for example, my kids, we went to Maple Bear, which is a Canadian school. So, dual Portuguese English. So there is a lot of international schools here. The universities are quite good. So education-wise as well, it's definitely not bad. Only thing there again is for universities and things like that, you do need to speak the language. There's not something that for small kids, there is normally international schools that they can do in both languages. But for the universities, etc., you do need to have fluent Portuguese.
Sure. And, if you're thinking of coming to Brazil to not just on a holiday, but to come and live there, how difficult is it with red tape and so on to get a work or residence visa?
It depends on your qualifications, and it depends on, there is a couple of options. So the majority of the countries now offer like investor visas, golden visas or things like that. So if you've got the funds, there's ways of coming in reasonably easy. If you come for on a work visa, there's a number of hoops and that you need to jump through. But there is specialized companies that help with that. It is a process that takes some time. Brazil, similar to Portugal, I don't know if you've experienced that before, but we say Brazil is the daughter of Portugal. And you see that in regards to bureaucracy, because we have a saying that the Portuguese always say that if you can do something in 2 steps, why do it in 1? They love processes. They love processes, and it's sometimes but if it's quicker this way. Oh, no, but the process says step 1, step 2, step 3. So there's a lot of bureaucracy that is being changed. So, for example, when I arrived in Brazil, to open up a company took you 60 days, 90 days, or something like that. Now it's down to a week or 2 weeks. So depending on the city as well, but it's much quicker, much more streamlined. So things are improving that things, but the Brazilian culture does love bureaucracy, unfortunately.
No, I suppose it's true. It's same in Portugal. We have issues constantly now with the airports. Oh my word, trying to get through an airport here with passport control is just a nightmare. And it's like they don't care. I mean, tourism is one of the biggest things in Portugal, but you wait 3 hours. It's just how it is,
It's just that. It's just that.
And they don't get
Exactly.
excited. That's the other thing. The Portuguese are such calm people. Us South Africans, we tend to get a little bit worked up if we have to wait. So yeah,
Exactly.
it's interesting. You mentioned obviously the tax complicated. So it is fairly complex to set up a business, but if somebody wants to do it, it's possible.
No, it's definitely possible. And speaking to someone, so for example, that is my specialty. If someone does think about doing business in Brazil, reach out to me. And if you set things up in the beginning correctly, it's not that complicated. And if you've got the right business partners looking after each part of it, it's very doable. But compared, for example, I remember when we did tax code training, etc., in South Africa. I think the tax code was changed once or twice a year, maybe. In Brazil, the tax changes comes in about 5 or 10 times a day. So it's nuts. It's nuts. So for you to keep track of that, I mean, if you come into the country and you say, you know what, no, I'm going to do everything on my own because we do it in many other countries, good luck to you. Not going to work that way. There it's good to have your specialist people that look after that, take care of it, and they focus on all of these changes and just give you the highlights rather than you trying to reinvent the wheel. It's not going to work.
Mm.
But the country is going now through a very big tax reform. It's still a moving target, so we're still going to need to see how things actually work out in the end. But it should streamline things a little bit, which for the day-to-day of an accountant or a tax specialist this side, it's going to make life a lot easier.
Mm. Just from a personal perspective, if you think about, living in Brazil versus South Africa, what would you say is the biggest sacrifice you've had to make?
Oof. First and foremost, being far away from the family. My parents are still alive, and both my sisters still live there. I have the possibility where I go back to South Africa maybe 2 or 3 times a year, so I still get to see them. But it's a cultural change. There's similarities, but it's different. And if you adapt and you embrace the language and you adapt and embrace the culture, which I think is similar if you live anywhere else in the world, if you can adapt and feel part of that culture, it's a great place to live. It really is not bad. And I joke nowadays with people. I say I'm 60% Brazilian, 40% South African, just because I've thrown myself so much into the local culture. But that helps. That helps. But we do. I mean, you miss. We get together a couple of South African friends, for example, in Porto Alegre, and have a beer and just talk in Afrikaans and joke about history and how things and past and whatever, and that helps. And even with the WhatsApp group, we normally, I think, once a week, the conversation goes on to we've got a new recipe for a milk tart, or who's got a recipe for a koeksister, or because those are the things that you miss. Someone found the other day a Kit Kat, a mint Kit Kat, and it tastes apparently like peppermint crisp, and everybody went ballistic. Where do we buy? Where do we get it? And it's beautiful to see things like that. We adapt to the country that we are in, but your heart will always be South African, always.
Absolutely. People have said that they feel more South African now that they live abroad than they did in South Africa, which I find it's quite an interesting concept, but it's true because, we're just South Africans. There we're parts of different and diverse groups, so maybe it's easier when we live abroad. I think the thing that the comment that you made now about embracing the culture, I think that's so important. And maybe it's better not to have a lot of South Africans around because, you think about the South Africans who go to Australia, New Zealand. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's a soft landing, as they call it, when you've got big Facebook groups and lots of people welcoming and big braais and so on. The one thing that we've found is not every South African who has immigrated is necessarily going to be my friend because we have different values. We maybe have got that in common, but that doesn't mean we're necessarily gonna get on. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting observation. Embracing the culture, because that's the other thing I find, and I don't know how many Brits you have in Brazil, but yeah, they love going to their English pubs and their Irish pubs and they watch soccer and they just don't become really part of the furniture here because they can go back for a weekend. And I think this, that's the one thing I find also about South Africans is when they move, it's such a long distance away. They have no choice.
Yeah.
And you're going to be very unhappy if you don't embrace it. So that's very good advice.
But on that sense, Jan, what I want to make a comment that this is for anybody that thinks of immigrating anywhere in the world in the future. This is something that helped me a lot when I arrived here. When I lived in London, for example, or in Scotland, we had a big group of foreigners. And so, I had, I think, 2 English friends. The rest were all, from across the globe. But when I got to Brazil, I think my 2nd or my 3rd year here, I was invited to go to train a rugby team. And I started getting involved with people, out of the rugby guys, I think one maybe spoke English. And getting involved in that world and finding a sport, local sport, and making local friends, just opened so many doors, just to help me connect and just help me understand the culture. And in the beginning, they joked a lot to me with the linguistics, but that helped me to train as well. And then a couple of years after that, I bought a motorbike and started doing motorcycle trips with Brazilian friends, which again also connected me to local friends and gave me access to the local culture. So that for me would be I mean, if I ever move again now to another country, that will be the first thing I would do. Find a local sport, get involved where you don't have a lot of foreigners that can, give you that soft landing that forces you to connect with the locals. Or find something else like motorcycle or, some activity that you can involve or get involved with the locals and that you're forced to speak, connect, understand. Um, and through that, it helps you to make the connection quicker and it helps you to adapt quicker as well.
I think that's such good advice, because I always say, uh, because you speak funny, people aren't going to come and look you up. You're going to have to put yourself out there, and often in families, people get depressed and, it's sometimes difficult for the wife because the husband's working and so on, but you've got to get out there. So you've got to go to the park and see other people and just be
Exactly.
there. Um, I guess on that front, with your wife being Brazilian, it was easier for you guys to adapt to living there, like for you
Yeah.
living in South Africa. So it wasn't really anything difficult for her moving to Brazil.
No, for her, because I mean, we came through to her family lives in this region, so for her it was difficult for her to adapt to Potchefstroom, but her being there, she got a very good understanding of how South Africa is, which has helped us on this side as well. Um, and yeah, I would imagine, if you go as a couple, like for a South African couple that move to a different country, it can be more complicated. At the same time, you've got each other, so you're both going through the same struggles, which also then bonds you closer because you're learning your way through it. But in this case, she helped me quite a lot, extremely in the beginning to be able to adapt and understand.
Yeah. And Werner, just another thought, cost of living wise, what is it like over there?
It's more expensive. It's definitely more expensive than South Africa, for example. Um, and if you pay a reasonable amount of taxes, and similar to South Africa, not all of that comes back. So it's yeah, it's an expensive country, but uh, there's ways and means that you can streamline your taxes. At the same time, there's also um, places that you can work for that you can really make some good money here. Again, because you've got a very big market. So if you come over as an employee, a lot of Brazilians are now working for foreign companies, US, Europe, etc. And a lot of foreign nationals that reach out to us to do their tax returns and things like that. They have their setup here, but they receive in dollars or they receive in pounds or whatever. If you have a setup like that, then Brazil is phenomenal. Then it's not that bad. But it is more expensive in comparison to SA, South Africa, for example.
And compared to the UK, for instance, just restaurants and buying a beer and a coffee and
You,
so on, that's always interesting to compare.
the UK, your money normally goes further. Let's put it this way. So a minimum salary in Brazil is, I think, 1,500 reais, which will be dollar terms about $300, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow, that's
Um,
low.
it's low. And I mean, with that, you don't survive. You people normally have 2 or 3 jobs and things that they do in order to try and make the ends meet. But as a comparison, for example, McDonald's, I think a meal would roughly be about 40, 50 reais, which would be about $10, um, $9 or $10 for a meal thing. And that's about 40 reais. Um, And a beer, depending on where you go to, can be anything from 5 reais up to 20, depending on, where you buy. But that's similar to, for example, London. If you go to zone 1, something will cost you £10, and if you go to zone 5, the same thing will cost you £2. It's just
Yeah,
depending on where you buy.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. But I mean, if I look at Portugal, I think the minimum wage is maybe 900 a year, a month.
A
So
month, yeah.
yeah, so
And
300
then
is
with the 900 euros, you can actually live quite well. That was the thing that I experienced. I mean, but I've been out of Scotland and UK now for a while. But what I remember from there, even with a lower amount, with 1,500 euros, 2,000 euros a month, you can live reasonably well. You can buy a car, you can eat good food, you can live. In Brazil, not so much. In Brazil, you do need a bit more in order to have a comfortable life. You need to have a high income.
And in your region, is housing expensive?
Yeah, compared to South Africa, definitely. So it's
Yeah.
much more. It's increased over the last years. Cars, for example, as well. It's much more expensive than it is, for example, in South Africa. And housing, Brazil is much more accustomed to apartments. So Sao Paulo, etc. as well, due to the size, it, it's gone up instead of expanding. So people live much more in 2, 3, 4, 500 square meter apartments instead of bigger houses. But yeah, it's expensive to buy it. Again, depending on where you go to.
Now, the problem in Portugal is obviously because of all the foreigners here, the locals can't afford their housing. So that's
Exactly.
where the big issue all the time politically. But yeah, I guess that happens all over the world. So maybe last question. I mean, you have spoken about advice to people who are thinking, and maybe you can just think about that as a final thought. But do you see yourself going back to South Africa?
A lot of people ask me that. I would maybe retirement one day, but business-wise, I'm in a very unique position here because you don't have many, you know, accountants, fluent English, fluent Portuguese, everything else that does what I do. So business-wise, it's very good to me to be where I am. If you ask me if I still want to do another country, I would love maybe actually to do Portugal and Spain to give it a go. But we'll see how life takes us. But at this point in time, South Africa, I love to go visit. I love to go see my family. I love to go drink South African wine, eat South African food. But um, Brazil, there's still a lot for me to do here. So I think for the time being, it's going to be here, and maybe in future, look at South Africa again, as I said, for retirement.
And your kids are fully Brazilian. They're not. They don't see
Yeah.
themselves
So
as.
at this point in time, my daughter is young. My daughter's 8. My boy is 4. So I mean, they've got both passports. We registered them in both countries. So they've been to South Africa a couple of times. So they've there was a cutest thing where my son was, I think, 2.5. We're doing a safari and he's calling the zebras with their hand, "Come zebra, come, come." It was lovely. Uh, so I mean, they are going to have contact with South Africa, and they are going to, we're raising them in English and Portuguese. So they are going to have their contact, and maybe, who knows, maybe in future they decide to go live there. But they do know their history, they do know their roots, they do know where they come from, and we'll see how that goes.
Quick reminder before we close today: if police clearances, apostille certificates, or any South African documents are still on your list, Apostille sorts it out for you. Visit the link in the description below and see how Apostille can help you on your journey. So yeah, this is the final question. If you think back as a young Werner now, and a young Werner comes to you and he says, okay, I'm 20, 22. What should I do? What will you advise him?
Wow. Good question, difficult question. I mean, if you at that point in time, we mentioned that in the beginning of the podcast, I was focused on a career route. Free State boy. I think my hometown has got, I don't know, 10,000 people. Small little place. Never in my mind could I have imagined Brazil, different languages. I've been now, I think, to more than 65 countries. Never would have imagined it. And going back to the 22-year-old Werner, um, I would just say live, because life has got its way of bringing magic to you. It's not always going to be good. It's not always going to be fun. But if you can take the ups and downs together, it's going to get you where you need to get to. Just make sure that you enjoy it and that you give it the most in everything that you do, basically.
Excellent. Wow, that's an awesome way to stop. Werner, where can people get hold of you?
So you've got me on LinkedIn, Werner Trieloff. That's my main contact page, and through that you can send me a message, and I'll we can contact via WhatsApp or via email afterwards. But that's normally my main form of contact.
Okay, excellent. We'll put your LinkedIn contact on the show notes.
Excellent, beautiful.
Thank you so much. Geez, that was such a lekker conversation. Love hearing about Brazil. It's one place that I still have to visit. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Jan, it's a pleasure, and looking forward to if in future you decide to come through, give me a shout, and that is open for other people as well. Yes, we help people with the business aspect as well, but if you think of, Werner, we want to come on holiday to Brazil, what do you suggest? Give me a shout. I'll recommend a couple of things. I love to show people South Africa, and similar on the same side as well. I love to show them Brazil and let them experience this wonderful country.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. And to our listeners, if this episode resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who might enjoy the conversation. You can find more episodes of The Relocated South African on your favorite podcast platform, or visit our website at relocatedSouthAfrican.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.
This episode is brought to you by Sable International, building futures beyond borders.